Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's masterclass with Patrick Lange, Business Modification Group. I'm your host, as always, CJ Todd, and I'm so excited to see so many folks on today's call. We had over 250 registrants, which tells me that more and more growth-minded contractors and investors are exploring this topic, and that's how to grow your HVAC business through acquisition. Now, whether you're actively pursuing a deal, you're just starting your research, or maybe you're just wondering if this is the right path for you, you are definitely in the right place, my friends. Over the next hour, we're going to break down the strategies for buying the right HVAC business, the kind that adds real value, scales efficiently, and sets you up for long-term success. So let us get to know you just a little bit better. I'm going to bring a poll up, and I want to understand which of these things best describes you. So maybe you are an HVAC business owner looking to grow through acquisition, or maybe you're a new buyer, you're new to the HVAC space and you're looking to get started, or maybe you're a private equity owner trying to build your portfolio. So please let me know in this poll what really best describes you. And while you're submitting your answers, here are a few things that we're going to be covering. We're going to talk about how to define your ideal acquisition target. We're going to talk about what sellers and banks are really looking for in a buyer and what the biggest mistakes are that Patrick sees buyers make and how to avoid them. All right. So thanks everybody for participating in that poll. Gonna end that. And now I really am excited to introduce you to Patrick Lange. Patrick is the owner of Business Modification Group, like I said before, and he has helped so many people buy the right HVAC business, more than anyone else in the country. With a background in financial planning and personal experience as a former HVAC business owner, he understands both the numbers side of things and the real world operations. And that makes him uniquely qualified to help buyers avoid the common traps and navigate deals with confidence. So he's personally brokered 146 HVAC business sales across the country. Now, I wrote this a few days ago. There's a good chance he probably sold one in between now and then, but he can get a little bit more into that with you. And that's the kind of track record that just doesn't happen by accident. It comes from knowing exactly what makes a deal successful for everyone involved. If you've ever tried to buy a business and felt overwhelmed, Patrick is definitely the guy that can cut through all the noise. He helps serious buyers get clear on what they're looking for. He evaluates deals that actually make sense, and he connects people with the right opportunities through his preferred buyer network. So if you are interested in buying that and joining that preferred buyer network, you can scan this QR code. And what that's going to do is it's going to help connect you with the right opportunities that might come up for you before the rest of the market gets to see it. So at any point in today's session, there's going to be a QR code that you can scan. I also will drop the link in the chat in just a few minutes. But more than all of that, my friends, something that's really stuck out to me over the years of knowing Patrick, he and I have done work together for, about 5 years now, and he really cares about people in this industry. He's here to help you understand your options so you can make the best decision, whether that means that you're buying right now or you're just planning for your future ahead. So if there's one person that I trust, if there's one person that the industry trusts, that is Patrick Lange. So Patrick, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Absolutely, CJ. Sorry, I had myself muted here trying to keep my mouth shut. So thank you so much for having me on. It's a pleasure being back. We did a masterclass like this a few months ago, and it was about selling, right? And we asked everybody listening if they thought they'd have an interest in doing something about buying. And so this is the first time we've ever done this. So I'm super excited to be here. And I appreciate everybody taking time out of their schedule to jump on a quick meeting we're having today. And hopefully everybody can get some value out of it.
Absolutely. I love it. So I want to start off with a question. Do you think purchasing an HVAC business is right for everyone?
Absolutely not. That's an easy question for me to answer. And I heard an analogy the other day, and it's kind of rude but kind of funny all at the same time. And I talked to them about buying a business and buying a business and fixing their business, and they said, just like having a baby is not going to fix a relationship, buying a business is not going to fix your business. So the first thing that I say to people, specifically those who are already in business, many people, many people think that, well, I'm struggling getting the phone ring, or I can't find talent, or I don't have these systems in place, and I'm going to buy something else and that's going to fix it. And it really doesn't. It really makes things worse. And so it magnifies the worst. If the phone's not ringing or you don't have systems dialed in, and that's the one I use at first, is the phone ringing. They think, oh, the phone's going to ring more, it's going to be better. Well, if you're not maximizing every call and aren't doing a great job taking care of your customers and aren't putting the right people on the right call, it's gonna make it worse. And same thing if your culture's not good. If you don't have a good culture, having more people and adding more people to a bad culture is going to make things worse. Or if you don't know anything about running a business, buying one that may not be run properly is not going to fix that for you. So I think making sure that you're the right person and your systems are dialed in before you go out and make an acquisition is absolutely what I would say to anybody considering buying.
That is 100% excellent advice. I'm going to bring up this kind of view. Me and you are going to have a dialogue today, and I really want this to be interactive session. So if at any time you have any comments or questions, anything you want to share with us, go ahead and drop that in the webinar chat, and we'll make sure to incorporate that into our conversation today. So Patrick, I want to start off by understanding how a buyer might define their acquisition strategy, right? So like I said before, you've managed the brokerage of 146 HVAC businesses. You've seen buyers succeed and fail. What separates the serious, successful buyers from the rest? And maybe what are some of the pitfalls that you see?
One correction there, it's 149 as of today.
Oh, nice.
And if things go right tomorrow, it'll be number 150. And I think I'm going to stop counting at that point. I think sometimes it loses its effectiveness and people think it's just another deal to me, and it's not. So really serious buyers, one, begin with the right mindset, right? They're realistic about what they're buying. I get so many calls from people who either don't know the industry or don't know buying a business, and they're looking for a unicorn, right? I want to buy a company doing $10 million in sales, making $1 million a year. The owner doesn't have anything to do with it. No, I want to buy it for $4 million kind of thing. And so I think starts off with understanding the market, understanding what's real, but it really goes back to understanding the industry as a whole. I have buyers who have no industry experience, and they'll call me and they want to understand what a maintenance agreement is. Well, if you haven't done your homework to even understand what a maintenance agreement is, you're stepping into a bad place to really step into. You need to do your homework. So I think they've done their homework. They understand what's real. They have realistic expectations. I get a lot of phone calls from people outside the industry, even some in the industry, that, hey, I want to buy this and I want the seller to finance the entire transaction for me, and I want them to stick around for 6 months for free, and I want them to do all these things, never once thinking about what they're saying, right? Is that real? Would you do that for your own business? And if the answer is probably not, well, then somebody else isn't going to do it as well. So the first thing I see with those successful buyers is they're real. They understand what they're doing. Second thing is they've done their homework. They understand the industry. The third thing is they've set up how they're going to buy it, right? They've either got capital lined up, they've got financing lined up, whatever the case may be. And then four, they often separate the emotion out, right? It's a big deal buying a business, and it's a big risk. And we'll get into it when we talk about the pitfalls, but they often get too emotionally attached on the people who aren't successful. Where somebody who is successful at doing it, they understand the numbers, they understand the math, they understand the system, they know what they're doing, they know what they're getting into. And if it doesn't fit, they walk away. Instead of trying to convince a seller to sell them a business they shouldn't be buying.
Yeah, we always hear the adage, there's no bad questions, but Mark Cuban said it best. He can really define whether you're going to succeed or fail by the questions you ask. So if you're asking those questions that you could have done a Google search on, or, brought to him like a little bit later on in the conversation, then you probably aren't cut out for this industry. Let's say someone's just starting out, right? How should a buyer define their acquisition criteria so they're not chasing the wrong deals? What does a wrong deal look like?
Yeah. So I think the first thing is understanding who you are as a person, right? I have a lot of people that come to me that are running $1 million business and they want to buy this $10 million business. I can promise you who you need to be running a $10 million business is a different person than who you need to be running $1 million business. And so I think understanding your own talents, your own abilities, you're having a good understanding of yourself is a great place to start. And sometimes people overbuy and think they can do more than they can, and it's going to run themselves. The reality is business is hard, right? At the end of the day, sitting in the driver's seat of a business, I often joke, your view changes when you sign the front of the check as opposed to the back of the check, right? Your perspective is completely different. And so understanding who you are as a leader, what your strengths and weaknesses are, and what realistically you can handle, and what can you bring to a business. And so then it's shopping on size, right? At the end of the day, understanding that where you are on size and what you can handle on size, and looking in that range from both a price standpoint and from a business standpoint. Because once again, I think growing from running $1 million business to a $3 million business to a $5 million business to a $10 million business, I think as a person you grow. Now, some people have run outside the industry businesses, and they've gained that talent from other industries. But many people are just starting out and thinking, well, I'm just going to run this $10 million business. Well, they're not ready for it. So making sure the business you're buying is not bigger than you are as a person, as a leader, as a financer, as all those things fit in, and then buying a business according to that.
Right. And you and I were talking a little bit before the show today about kind of some common pitfalls and what it's like trying to do business without a broker in some of these instances. And we talked about kind of how, things can get inflated when it comes to that sale price. And once an expectation is set, it's really hard to backtrack and set the right expectation. So Alan Mitchell, he reminded me of that conversation when he asked, how do we get a $1 to $2 million business owner to understand that they're not worth 15x? Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I spend 15 hours a day having that conversation. So it's not easy. And part of the problem, and obviously, CJ, you and I have met through many industry events, your former life at EGIA. Somebody inevitably at every event we go to gets up on stage and says, hey, I sold my business for $20 million or a 20-time multiple or whatever that is. Oftentimes they're lying, or they didn't explain all the details. But many of the people sitting in the audience that are running $1 million business think, oh, well, now my business is worth $10 million. And so they never take the time to do a valuation. The last masterclass we did, we focused on valuation and how I'm a huge believer in valuations and why we give them away for free and probably do 5 at least a week in our office so people know what's real for their business. I spend a lot of time hurting people's feelings. At the end of the day, it's reality. I have a YouTube channel. I think my most watched video is a video I have on there called Your Baby's Ugly, where I say to people, hey, your baby, what you've spent your lifetime building doesn't have value or doesn't have the value that you want it to have. And I did the video as a joke, partially for me to deal with it, because I sat at so many tables with 70-year-olds and said, hey, you spent your entire life building it wrong. And so it's a horrible conversation to have. And I do these kind of classes and speak at the events and write the articles, and I'm active on social media. So hopefully people reach out and find out realistically what theirs is worth when they're 40 or 50, not when they're 70. And so there's no right answer, Alan. And the answer ends up being kissing a lot of frogs, right? It's having that conversation over and over and over and over and over until you find somebody who is real, that's really in a position to take realistic advice. When I talk to sellers, we'll talk briefly about the business. Tell me about your sales, business mix, blah, blah, blah. And I'll ask them, they're doing $1 million a year. And I'll ask them on the first phone call every time, what does the check need to say for you to walk away? What are you thinking it's worth? And if that $1 million person says $4 million, the call typically ends. And I say, hey, I'm not the guy to help you. It's not real. Somebody may, and that's delusional, may pay you what you're looking for, but the average market's not going to, and I don't want to waste your time and tell you I can get that for you. So that's how we handle it. And through education, trying to get those people there. So I hope that answers Alan's question. And I know Alan's a fantastic operator and a fantastic buyer. And so we've been looking for Alan for a number of years, and I'm hoping someday we find one that is right for him.
Yep. I'm confident you'll find a frog that can turn into a prince or a princess there for him. And Eric, I just want to say thank you for your comment. We'll get to kind of delving into, the specifics between buying a commercial and buying a residential business during the Q&A. I think that would be an interesting conversation to have, Patrick. But in terms of where we're at right now in the kind of defining your acquisition strategy, we talked a little bit about why it was a mistake to go directly to your competitor and ask if they want to sell before we started the call. So maybe talk a little bit about that and what someone should do instead. Like, are there strategies? Are there places to look that maybe buyers aren't thinking of?
100%. Great question. And obviously, we've talked about this previously. Put yourself in a competitor's shoes. If somebody from down the street, a competitor, comes in and says, "Hey, I want to see your books and your numbers," you automatically would be defensive. Second part of that is when that happens, now they think they're trying to steal their customers, they're trying to steal their employees. And no matter what value they give them, they automatically think you're trying to rip them off. Really, at the end of the day, they think they're coming in here and telling me this. I have a lot of buyers call me and say, "Hey, I want to buy this guy down the street. Will you call him?" And we try. Where I have found what I have found more effective is do a broad canvas of the area and find somebody that's open to selling, do evaluation, and then say, "Hey, I potentially have a buyer for you." Instead of me knocking on a door saying, "Hey, I've got a buyer for you. What's your business worth?" So it, automatically, when you go directly to a competitor, it makes them kind of standoffish, rightfully so, right? Finding quality employees is hard. Customer relationships are hard. And for them to peel back the onion and say, "Hey, take a look at whatever you want to," is scary. And then they're always questioning value. So I don't think that's the most effective way of doing it. One of the most effective ways and often overlooked ways, I think, is supply houses, manufacturers, reps, and supply houses. The reality is those are the barber shops of heating and air, right? They know who's whining about what. They know who doesn't like their boss. They know who doesn't like their employees or is considering retirement, or who's come in every week and said, "I heard so and so sold. I'd like to sell like them." And so I really think nurturing the supply houses, the counter guys, is incredible. The TMs from your manufacturers is an incredible place to do it, and getting the word out through them because they talk to everybody. And so what I've seen work extremely well with buyers is they start spreading the word. "Hey, we're buying. We're looking at buying." And once they do a few acquisitions, what I've seen happen is those sellers start calling them saying, "Hey, I'd like to sell my business. I heard you're buying." And so automatically the guards left down. They're not worried about you looking at them. They're coming in, bringing you deals, and they'll start bringing you more deals. So that's the first place. Obviously, the second place, I'm biased, is going to be on my preferred buyer list, right? We have a buyer list and we can talk more detail about that when we get a listing before we go to the general market, I'm going to send it to my preferred buyers because I've done deals with them or I've vetted them and I feel confident that they're really buyers. So we'll typically 2 to 3 days before we go live for the rest of the world to see, we'll put it to those buyers lists. So getting on those lists, other brokers I know have similar little lists that they do. And so getting on those lists of deals are brought to you as opposed to you having to hunt to them. And then the general area, right? Going to the business for sale sites, Biz Buy Sell and Axial and others like that have general listings out there. But really, the diamond in the rough, in my opinion, is going to be getting around people, suppliers, supply houses, warranty providers, all these people that are around the people you want to buy daily, and start letting them know, "Hey, I'm looking at buying," and they'll start bringing you deals.
And there's an incredible amount of, engagement in the chat right now. And I think as we talk about acquisition strategy and finding the right company or finding a company to, initiate an acquisition kind of process, and we get into evaluating that business, what's the first place they should start? So maybe through the supply house, maybe through a conversation that happened, maybe somebody got approached. What's the first step? What would you recommend happening from the buyer's perspective once they find kind of a target?
So let's assume that it's a target. We'll assume a few things. One, it's a target, and it's a target who's open to selling, right? If that's the case, if somebody's raised their hand and said, "I'm open to selling," is getting a valuation done, whether whether you understand the numbers and are able to give them data. Coming to somebody like me, I have a lot of people that come to me and say, hey, I'm looking at a deal. Can you do a valuation for us? We do it. Other brokers will do the same thing. One place I'd stay away from is I wouldn't go to an accountant to get that done. I have found that the buyer's accountant always tells you it's worth nothing, and the seller's accountant always tells you it's worth millions of dollars. And both are right, depending on what they're looking at. We use comp data. So we use comps of businesses that have sold in the area of similar size, and that's where it should sell for. So oftentimes getting a third party, there's also evaluation companies that will you could pay them to do a valuation. And I think having somebody on the outside to provide that makes a seller more at ease. Hey, it's not just you saying that, but even backing up a step from there is making sure you got the resources to buy it. But a lot of people come to me and raise their hand, say, I'm interested in this listing. And I'll say, great, how are you going to pay for it? Well, I plan on getting the seller to finance the whole thing, or I'm going to use SBA, or I'm going to do this and this. And they haven't lined that up. It's a competitive landscape out there buying companies.
Right.
I haven't looked at the numbers this year. I think we've sold 20, 22, something like that companies this year. And we normally sell 20 to 25 in a year. And I think I have 11 more right now under contract to close before the year end. I'm not saying that to impress anyone, just that there's a lot of activity taking place. And if there's a good business and you're looking at buying it, you need to have your ducks in a row when you get there to buy it. Not, well, I need to start talking to a bank and find out what's going on. If you're going to use SBA financing, go get pre-approved. Get the bank all your tax returns, all your information, so you know what's going on. If not, if you have the cash in the bank, obviously then you're in the driver's seat, and that makes things easier. But having those things lined up ahead of time so you know what's going to do. Does that answer your question, CJ?
I think so. There's just a few questions in the chat, right? So Raydell, what's, the typical price for a small HVAC company, residential in Missouri? Derek asks, we're out in a rural area. Somebody jokes around with me about buying his company all the time. Where do I begin? And then, Anthony talking about like, how do we evaluate a business with no contracts, with no memberships? So it's like all of those concerns, I think, can be kind of alleviated with a third party kind of business valuation, is what I'm understanding.
Well, and I know there's a lot of buyers on here that I know that have bought a lot of companies. So they're in a position to potentially do it themselves. So I'm not here to say you need to call me to look at every deal. That's certainly not what this is for. And I'm happy when we're done, we can do a Q&A section and I'll go through and give sample valuations. Here's what a company doing $2 million in Atlanta versus one, in a small town in Georgia will go for, or California versus Texas versus New York and Florida, because the reality is, geographically speaking, the market's different, right? I sell a lot of companies in California. What it sells for in California and what it sells in Arizona or Texas are different. There's not as many people moving to California to buy a business as there are moving to Texas to buy a business, for example. Not as many people moving to New York or New Jersey to buy a business that are moving to the Southeast to buy a business. And so as a result of that, there's buyer competition. And that buyer competition creates premiums in certain markets, or lack of buyers creates better opportunities in other markets. And so I'm certainly, when we're done with this, I'm happy to stick around afterwards and we can go through pricing, sizes, ranges, commercial versus residential. We can do that if you like, CJ.
Yeah, Raydell, Derek, Anthony, Kenny, just kind of save all that till the end. And when we get to the Q&A section, happy to go through all that. And also Bill and Joey, we're going to get into kind of financing and SBAs a little bit later. So thank you for those questions. So emotional buying decisions, right? We've understood kind of where to find opportunities. We've understood kind of this business valuation to kind of set the stage if buyers want to do that. So what happens when we get into the actual buying process and we run into kind of some of those emotional triggers, emotional red flags, emotional barriers that we might need to get through? What's kind of your recommendation for moving through those in a positive way?
Well, I think one, having a plan and a system in place, right? For most sellers, It's the biggest sale of their life financially. Most sellers have never sold a company, and most sellers spent their life building it. So they're emotionally attached to it. So emotionally, take away the financial side, right? Take away the math behind it. It's a huge deal for them. Many of the sellers we worked with been in business 20, 30 years. They're known in their community as the heating and air, the plumbing guy, right? That's how they're identified. And so the thought of them walking away from that is super scary. And now, are they making the right decision? Is it the right price? Are you the right buyer? Is it the right time? What are they at risk with? There's all these things going on, and they're scared. And so, understanding and respecting that. Some people come to deals and they treat it like it's just another deal. And for these people, these sellers, it's not another deal. It's their life, right? At the end of the day, they've never done it. And for most people, they'll do it one time in their life. It's their only time. And so understanding and respecting that, I think is the first step. And knowing it's going to be emotional. And I tell all sellers, even once we go under contract, listen, there's going to be speed bumps in the road. Things are going to happen between now and closing. So let's anticipate it. Let's do what we can to minimize it. And let's just understand what it happens, that we're not going to go berserk, right? We're not going to panic. It's not going to be the end of the day. And then you as a buyer are going to start asking them for things they didn't even know they had. I mean, that's the thing. Most buyers are more sophisticated than the sellers. And so buyers are coming in and asking them to pull reports that they don't even track. They don't even know that report exists. And so for some people, it's kind of embarrassing that, well, I didn't even know we did this, or we don't track that, should we? Or that's not the way we do. Then they become defensive. And so understanding the emotional side of it really is the key to a good deal getting across, and understanding, try to put yourself in their seller's shoes, right? At the end of the day, and respecting that. And I think that's the first step to resolving those emotional questions or issues or problems that come up.
Yeah, I think we're all human beings and we all have those emotional triggers, and just having that third party that's unbiased, that has, I mean, you have such an incredible understanding of the market and trends, and you've gone through so many, 149 of them, right? So you know exactly kind of what to expect, what the red flags look like, what the green flags look like, are probably just as important. Um, and I think there's some real value into working with you. Let's see. There's one question in the, okay, Joey asks, what are some of the best educational tools to learn more about where to start, funding options, how to progress successfully through this? And I just want to say, Patrick has an incredible newsletter, email marketing that he sends out, really value add tools. I think once a week, is it, Patrick? Or maybe once every couple
Varies.
weeks?
Yeah, it just depends on when the topic hits. We try to do 4 articles a month.
Okay.
And we try to make them buying and selling related. And then we also distribute our listings and things we see happening in the market. If we put out a new video, that kind of stuff. So it's sporadic. It's at least 2 times a month, though.
Okay. And what other tools do you think are available and good to follow in the industry?
There's lots of them, right? Almost every organization has newsletters. There's a lot of newsletters. A lot of people now are getting big in the acquisition space. Jacquisitions is one of them that I've recently contributed to, and so there's a lot of them out there. And I think anywhere you can get content and data that's unbiased is a good place to be, right? I don't claim to know everything, and I talk about these emotional triggers. We still have deals that get emotional, right? They all don't go smoothly. I've had sellers that have lost their marbles, right? And I'm like, where are they coming from? And I've had buyers who've been so unrealistic that we just can't get the deal across. And so not everything's perfect, and not every deal we do is perfect, but doing everything you can to minimize those things. And once again, I'm not here to say you have to do business with Patrick Lange. Obviously, I'm biased. I think we do a good job here, but there's other people who do a good job too. And so I think the key is getting as many people on your team and on your side as you can. So it's not just you against them. It's everybody working in the same direction. Makes things so much easier for everyone involved.
That makes a ton of sense. Sticking to the avoiding bad deals kind of topic, you mentioned Warren, you mentioned against buying too big. Can you talk a little bit about what happens if someone that's maybe $1 million a year operator takes a leap into trying to buy a $5 million company? What does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. I think people do try to be too big, right? And I think part of the process, in addition to the financial part of growing from that $1 million operator to $5 million operator or $10 million operator, is the education you get along the way, right? Everywhere I've lost money, I call it paying for an education, right? If it costs me enough money, I won't do that again. And so, and I think it's who you become as a leader, as a business owner, as an operator, that allows you to go through each of those phases. But here's also with that, people think they can buy their way out of the issues they're in. If you're running a company right now doing $1 million and you go buy a $5 million company, that $5 million company is going to have way more people than you do. You're going to end up taking on their culture as opposed to theirs taking on yours. And it can be a disaster. I'm a huge believer in culture in the business. I'm a huge believer in it being a good fit. Because at the end of the day, take away the X's and O's, dollars and cents, we're in the people business, right? If you're in the trades, whether it's plumbing, electrical, heating and air, you're having to deal with customers, you're having to deal with employees, you're having to deal with supply house reps, it's always dealing with people. And I think the culture on how you deal with people and how your company responds to people and how your company treats people is so huge. When I look at these companies that are growing and doing well, it's typically not the ones who are ripping everybody off, right? We all know those companies that just sell everything to everyone, doesn't matter if they need it or not. But the companies that really do well make a positive impact in their communities, make a positive impact in their employees' life, make a positive impact in their families. And so I think they're so much better. So going and buying, if you're slowly building that culture-driven organization and you go buy a company that rips everybody off, well, what's going to happen to your company? It's going to be more people that are ripping people off instead of doing what's right. And now you've got a culture problem you're trying to fix. So I think buying on that upper end can really haunt you.
So buying large, you're risking losing your culture to their culture. What about buying too small?
Yeah, and I think that's the opposite end of the pendulum, right? I think that is buying too small. We all know the Chuck in a truck or a Dan in a van. And those guys in their own world are super profitable, right? They have no overhead. So everything they do is profit, right? They don't have to make that money. And so where you might sell a capacitor for $300, they're selling it for 100 and they're probably making more money than you are. And so the downside of that is, as a result of their low overhead and their low pricing, oftentimes their customers are cheap, right? Their customers are used to getting something for nothing. And the minute you come in and you raise prices to where they need to be so you can make money, once again, I'm not a fan of ripping people off, but I'm not opposed to making profit, right? So when you raise the prices to where they need to be so you could take good care of your people and be in business 5 years from now to be able to take care of those customers, a lot of them will leave, right? To them, it's doubling and tripling what they've been paying, and they're very price sensitive. Second part of that is they're used to calling the owner up at 8 o'clock on a Sunday night on a cell phone, and he answers and either goes there
Yep.
himself or says, I'll be there at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning. And the minute they call your office and they get a dispatcher that says, hey, we're gonna have somebody there tonight, but here's what it's gonna cost you, or the soonest we can get there is tomorrow at 10 o'clock in the morning, they're not happy. So they go find another Chuck in a truck or a Dan in a van where they can have their cell phone number. They can call them at a moment's notice. They're going to come out for nothing. There's no overtime charge, or they're not going to charge them a weekend rate, and they're going to show up and fix it. And it was a drain line. And don't worry, Mrs. Smith, we're not going to charge you anything because it was a drain line. They're going to leave. That's what their expectations are.
Right.
And sometimes it's hard to educate that customer into paying what's real.
And you mentioned before, during the buying process, having buyers kind of see themselves in the seller's shoes. Well, they should also see themselves in the end customer's shoes, right?
Absolutely. And too often, and I'm on every Facebook and LinkedIn group there is, I think, in heating and air. And a lot of owners are beating their chest saying, we've got to charge $600 for a capacitor to pay our guys. And so they just look at it from that viewpoint. But if you're a customer who's been getting it for $100, $100, and you don't educate that customer on why the pricing is different, you just say, hey, Tony's going to be there tomorrow. And Tony gets there, he charges them $600. They're probably going to leave.
Right.
Because that's their expectation, and you're not delivering something different, or at least educating on something different. So there's a whole process. And I sold a company 2 years ago. Guy was doing $13-ish million in sales, and he had actually bought 3 or 4 1- and 2-man companies from me. And he had an entire system of how he converted them. So from taking a picture with him and the seller together, then how that was what they said to the customers, then getting in the customer's home, then explaining the difference of what they really do differently. He had an incredible system, and he said it took him an average of 2 to 3 months to pay for the whole business he just bought.
Wow.
Because of his system of dealing and communicating just with that customer. But the first one he bought, he lost money on. Then he figured, what do we do wrong? And then he controlled the narrative, controlled the conversation, knew what they were doing, knew how they did it, often gave services away free to get in the customer's home to show them, we're going to pull the blower wheel. We're going to do these things that the other guy hasn't been doing. Because often that Chuck in a truck, Dan in a van, or the guy doing $800,000 and less, they wear that with a badge of honor because they believe they're doing a better job for their customer, right? They're still nursing the R22 system for Mrs. Smith, and by gosh, we're not ripping her off and we're not selling her something she doesn't need. Oftentimes, many times, let's say, maybe often's too strong of a word, it's not in the customer's best interest. You coming out twice a year and pumping it full of $1,000 of Freon may not be the answer, and their electric bill through the roof because their system can't handle the heat that requirements. And so what they wear as a badge of honor, and the reason they're doing it, that customer hasn't had a choice. They didn't know that now they can get better equipment, or they didn't know that increased filtration existed and their kid with asthma doesn't have to be struggling, and they didn't know their ducts could be clean, and they never got choices. So I think a lot of it has to do with that acquisition, the education of the customers that you take on.
It's almost as if Joe in the chat is peeking into my notes over here. He asks, so what's the sweet spot?
I'm super biased in this, right? So this is Patrick Lange's bias. So I love $1.5 million to $3 million in sales, and really $1.5 million to probably $2.5 million in sales. And here's my rationale. Above $1 million, the owner's got to get out of their own way. They're not running every service call. They've got to have other technicians. So the customers are not used to the owner coming to their house. So at that level, the next step is typically that guy or girl who's doing $1.5 million or $2 million in sales, great technician, often not an incredible business owner. So they've been limping people along under the championship of taking better care of their customers. Oftentimes, the technicians who work for them are running 8 to 10 calls a day in the summer, and they're not spending time in the customer's home. They often don't have a CRM system that's used very much. They often don't believe in maintenance agreements. Customers never been offered it. They don't believe in indoor air quality. They've never given the customer choices, and they have no sales system in place. And so there's separation from the owner, but there's no real sales system in place to try to educate the customer and offer them choices. So I have watched so many $2 million companies in the first 12 months become $4 million companies by taking great care of customers and taking great care of their employees and educating people. Once again, not in the rip them off model, but just doing a good job. Those are instant. I can tell you, taking a company from 10 million to 20 million takes a long time. From 2 to 4 can happen overnight. So that $1.5 million to $2.5 million range is my biased sweet spot. And one other thing, or a couple of things. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off before you said something there, CJ. That you're not competing against every large private equity group in the country. You can buy that company substantially cheaper and still be a fair price for the seller. So you can get a better deal, for lack of a better term, because of the things they haven't done. It's going to require work, right? You're going to have to get in there and roll up your sleeves and put systems in place and train people and educate people and work on pricing and all these things. It's going to be work, but man, it catapults the business moving forward. So I'll shut up there, let you talk, CJ.
No, I love that. That's a lot of good insight. So I want to move from, all right, we've found the deal, we've evaluated the business, and we know we want to move forward. So let's talk about what the deal structure looks like. What's the smartest way for buyers to protect themselves while still creating an offer the seller wants to say yes to?
Yeah, and that's really the hardest part. Many buyers, wrongfully so, say, I'm taking on all this risk, the seller needs to finance it. When I first started brokering in the trades, because there wasn't the interest that there is today, seller finance deals existed, and were not uncommon. Now there's so many buyers in the space. It's really challenging, really challenging to get a seller that's willing to finance more than 10%. And here's, once again, here's the reality. Put yourself in the seller's shoes. You're a complete stranger coming to me saying, hey, I want to buy your business. I don't know you, and I want you to finance it for me. And if I fail, you get back old vans and you get back a business that you didn't want. And now that business that you didn't want is probably in the gutter, and the employees have probably left and the customers have left. So the risk is so huge to a seller, and they're at a stage in their life, if they're 50 or 40 and you ask that and they can go rebuild it, it's not that big of a deal. Most of these sellers are 60 and 70 years old, and it's their life savings. And so way too often I see buyers trying to convince a seller that them holding a note's the right answer. And in this market, in my opinion, it's challenging to get done. Small seller notes, so the seller has some skin in the game, is reasonable, and I think it's a reasonable ask. Really, either being a cash buyer is the easiest way to get it done. Second easiest way is SBA financing, especially if you're in the trades. If you're in the trades, own a company already, don't need the revenue from the new company you're buying. Oftentimes, most lenders will finance 100% of the deal with no money down. So you could buy a business that's cash flowing from day one with no out of pocket, get the vans, get the people, get the brand, get everything with no money out of pocket. Certainly interest rates are higher today than they were a few years ago, but they're buying it based on cash flow. And so to me, that's an incredible opportunity to do it. And the seller doesn't care where the money comes from as long as it's not coming from them. So I have a lot of buyers that call me and say, hey, I'm using SBA financing. Is that okay with the seller? Seller doesn't care what bank gives it to you. As long as they get it at the closing table, that's the easiest and cleanest way to get it done.
Yeah, that's a great transition into kind of my next question. And a lot of people are interested to understand how we access financing. How do we go about SBA business loans? So I got a pre-submitted question a couple days ago. If a buyer is not in the HVAC space currently and does not have an HVAC license, how do you recommend progressing through an SBA loan? And so I wanted to kind of get feedback from the group here, see who's on the call. In the chat, let us know if you have a business license or you don't have a business license, because I think that there's two very different paths that you would recommend going down if someone is in the industry and has a business license, or if they don't have one, or if they're in one of those markets that don't require a business license. So, wow, a lot of people in the chat.
Chat went wild.
Yeah.
So yeah, let me provide a little clarity on that. So the SBA in June made a rule change, and it says if you don't have a license and let's use heating and air as the example just to keep things easier. Most of the companies we sell, the seller's the sole license holder. They have a license. There's no reason for anybody else to have it because they have it, so they don't need another one. So many buyers in the marketplace today don't have heating and air experience. They want to buy a heating and air company. Up until June, they could buy the business. The seller could remain on as a license holder and either hold a little bit of equity and stay on, and the SBA was good with that. Then the seller got their own license, bought out, or the buyer got their own license, bought out the seller's little 5% or whatever equity they held, and then the seller went away. In June, the SBA came out unexpectedly and said, hey, the seller can no longer remain on as the license holder. If they do, they're required to personally guarantee the note for the first 2 years. Well, I don't know a seller crazy enough to sell their business to a complete stranger and then say, oh, by the way, I'll be personally liable for your loan for the first 2 years. It was the SBA's way of not saying you can't do it. They're saying you can do it, but they structured it in a way that nobody, to me, in my mind, in the right mind, is going to do it. I wouldn't do it if I was selling my business. So the beauty of that is, if you're in the trades already and have a license, it just eliminated a ton of your competition. It just eliminated a ton of buyers. And as I mentioned earlier, if you own another company, don't need the income from this one, most lenders will do the deal with no money out of pocket. So you could buy a business with nothing down, financed over 10 years, and have less price competition because there's less buyers in the marketplace. So if you're a buyer looking to buy a business, looking to buy a trades business and don't have a license, there is workarounds. One, find somebody to partner with, right? Find somebody who has a license and let them be a partner with you, and automatically that'll eliminate that. Two, get your own license. At the end of the day, you're gonna want your own license anyways, in my opinion. Or three, we've done this in the past, buy a smaller company that you can afford to buy cash, buy that company, get that seller to be your license holder, and now go buy a bigger one using SBA financing, because by that, then you already have a license holder. It's just not going to be the seller of that company, and that eliminates that SBA rule. So there are workarounds. It just takes additional space. Does that make sense, CJ?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So yeah, just understanding how each individual buyer might approach this situation a little bit differently. We got, I lost all the questions because so many people told us if they had a license or not. Earnouts, is it? I apologize for not knowing exactly what an earnout is, but what is your opinion on earnout? And maybe for all of us lay folks, you could tell us what that means.
Yep. So an earnout is you buy the business, and on part of the purchase price is financed over a period of time, but the financing has to do with the performance of the business. So if the business hits certain metrics, whether it's gross sales or net income, everybody structures them a little different, that then the seller gets their money.
Gotcha.
Cool. This is going to make a lot of people probably on here mad. I'm not a fan of them. Once again, putting myself in a seller's shoes, and here's the rationale why. One, I think private equity has exploited them. And you'll see there's been bankruptcies of big private equity funds, and those people who were tied into an earnout just lost all their money. And I think that's ridiculous, partially. So here's the issue. If I'm a seller, and CJ, you're buying my business, and you say you're going to pay me $1 million for it, but 500,000 of it, I've got to hit certain metrics over the next 3 years. Well, one, I'm not there running it anymore. So I don't have control if it's going to hit those numbers or not. So most buyers say, well, they just want to make sure it wasn't a fluke year and that the business is going to continue. On the gross sales side, I have no control of what the economy is going to do as a seller. I have no control if you make every customer mad or if you fire the employees. I have no control of the business moving forward. I'm especially against it, I guess would be the term, when it's tied to net performance, because I can't control your expenses. I've heard horror stories of people who sold, typically to private equity, and the private equity group had this earnout in there. And knock on wood, I've never sold a company to private equity that involved an earnout based on net performance out of 149. And the rationale is there. I don't have control of the P&L, and they go back and add deal related expenses to the P&L. So they're going to say, hey, in the next 12 months, if the EBITDA is the same as it was the last 12 months, you're going to get paid. And the seller thinks, yeah, that'll work. Well, then they add they have $100,000 of quality of earnings and $50,000 of attorney's fees, and they had all these other expenses to the deal. And now they would have made the money, but they didn't because all these deal expenses were tied in it that they had no control over. And the buyer says, well, you didn't hit your number. And here's the reality. If it's a decent amount of money, it's in the buyer's best interest not to hit those earnouts, right? Because if they have to make $100,000, and if they do, they have to pay you $1 million. just don't hit the $100,000, they don't have to pay you the million. So to me, it aligns a buyer and a seller at opposite ends of the spectrum, in my opinion. And my belief is you should get paid today for what you've built. What it does in the future, if a buyer wants you to either guarantee or be proactive on future performance, then my belief is tie a bonus structure in it. Say, hey, I'm going to pay you X for the business, and if it does X amount next year, we'll pay you an extra 100 grand or 200 grand or 500 grand or whatever that is. So then me as a seller, I've got a vested interest in you doing well. Most sellers, and I say most, are ethical, honest people and want to see the business do well. It's their baby, it's their legacy. So they're happy to help you make sure it does well. But cutting their retirement in half because you didn't do a good job running the business is not fair, in my opinion. So I don't want to look at the chat because I'm sure they're blasting me in the chats. It may not have been the place to say this, but I just think it's unfair to the seller to do that.
No, I definitely agree just from hearing that explanation. And you're probably not getting ripped as much as you think in the chat. I think a lot of people feel the same way. Out of those 250 folks that signed up for this masterclass, a lot of them said that they are either actively in a deal and would like help evaluating that deal, or they're looking to buy in the next 6 to 12 months. So as we kind of come to a close and start fielding some questions for the Q&A, what are the 2 to 3 things for that group that they should focus on right now to be ready when the right opportunity comes to the market?
Getting their ducks in a row. If they're going to use SBA financing, start talking to a lender now. Get them your tax returns, get them the information they're going to need. So when you make an offer, it's real and you're able to close on it. Understand what market multiples are. Understand what's real. I have a lot of people who believe they're valuation experts who will make an offer on a business and it's way off of where the offer should be. And I'll say, hey, the seller's not going to accept that offer. You're way off. They're like, no, that's what it should be going for. And I ask, where did you get that information? What comp data do you have that says that? And they're like, well, that's what I heard. Well, that's what I heard is not a realistic valuation for somebody who believes their business is up here. And so understanding the numbers behind it. So when you get in front of that potential seller, you know what the numbers need to be to make sense for you. And here's the reality. And I had a seller explain this to me one time, and it was fantastic advice. So as we're talking about selling his business, and we're going to talk to a bunch of buyers and how we're going to do it, he said, so Patrick, let me just explain the way he called it a simple mind. He said, so it's like shoe shopping, right? Buying a business is like shoe shopping. You walk in the shoe store and you put a shoe on and it doesn't fit. You don't get mad at the clerk and you say, that's a garbage shoe. You say, that's not the one for me. And you keep going till you find the one that fits you. And I said, exactly. And that's the same thing with buyers. I have buyers who get so, I'm going to buy this business. I'm going to buy this business. And they become angry about it almost. And they believe the seller's a jerk and it's not realistic. Don't buy it. If you don't like the price, don't buy it. If you guys can't agree on price, there's all these other things that are so much harder to agree upon, you're never going to agree upon. I believe buying a business and selling a business is like a marriage, not a divorce. And I think some people treat it like a divorce, where you're teaming up with somebody and taking over their legacy. If I'm buying your business, I don't want you to think I ripped you off the entire time and hate me, because at some point I'm going to need to pick up the phone 5 months later and call you, and I'm going to want you to answer. I'm going to want you to answer and then help me. Right. And if you think I ripped you off and I did a bad thing, you're going to look at, oh, Patrick, hang up. You're never going to answer me. And so I think it needs to be a partnership. And if you can't agree on price, don't get mad. Don't try to prove how right you are. Okay, thank you, and move on. Because if you are right and that business is that overpriced, they're not going to sell anyways. Nobody's going to buy it. So it doesn't really matter. Nobody's going to lose in the deal.
Absolutely. And Patrick, Derek Hendrickson says, I think Patrick has a great balanced opinion, and I couldn't echo that sentiment more. And I just really appreciate all the insight, all the expertise, you taking the time to really, just opening yourself up and answer questions, because I think, the industry really needs that. And I want to launch a quick poll. Patrick, you're one of the most humble people I know, but I gotta come to bat for you right now and just say that you're an incredible human being, an incredible broker. Everybody on this call should be at least having a conversation with Patrick. So I would like to launch another poll. Sorry, I launched the wrong one. But I would like to launch a poll to see who would want to have a chat with Patrick, just to get some more information on how to acquire HVAC businesses, maybe carry over this conversation. We're coming up to the top of the hour. We're definitely going to answer some questions, but we might not get to them all. So you can ask, Patrick some questions. You can kind of see, what is available on the market, and what, information or recommendations he has to help you with purchasing a HVAC business. So please just participate in that poll and let us know if you want to call from Patrick, and we're going to jump into a Q&A session real quick. So I'll give it a couple more minutes. But Patrick, I just want to say I appreciate your time today, and you're just an incredible person, and I love, every interaction I get to have with you. Is there any kind of final thoughts you want to offer the audience before we get into that Q&A?
I appreciate that. Kind words, I really do. And obviously, part of this is self-serving, right? I want to deal with buyers who are serious and buyers who who are educated and want to do the best they can to buy it. And so by doing these events, I know I'm going to get to talk to those people. And so eliminate the tire kickers, eliminate the people who are dreaming, and deal with real people. So I really appreciate everybody taking time to jump on here, to think that, over 60 people showed up, or whatever the number was today, showed up, and to hear us talk about this is humbling to me. And I appreciate everything the trades has done for me and my family. As you know, CJ, I was in the trades. My son and daughter-in-law bought me out of my heating and air company. They run it today, so I'm still around the industry all day, every day. I'll stay and answer questions. I don't know how much time we have left, but if there's questions in there, we can roll through them. I think probably the biggest one has been multiples, and maybe we could start there as you're looking at questions. I'm going to kind of give you a broad multiple, and it's going to be a range, because the range is going to be, is it in Florida, or is it New York, or is it in Texas or California? So let's assume $1 million company making $150,000 a year. And for this part of the conversation, I'm going to assume it's 100% residential, service, repair, replacement, no or limited, extremely limited new construction. $150,000, I would anticipate that to sell for a 2 to 3 time multiple. So 300 to 450,000. Let's bump that up to a company doing $2 million a year, making 300,000. I'm going to assume that their SDE is going to be around 15%. So $300,000, depending on the area, I would think that will sell for a 3 to maybe 4.5 time multiple. Would be real. Company, let's jump up to 5 million. So 5 million is always the tricky one, because every $5 million company I see falls into 2 buckets. One, they're still in the growth phase, so they're not super profitable, and they're hiring people to get above that level. I see in the trades, I see $1 million, $3 million, $5 million, and then $10 million being the hurdles to get over. And each one of those, you need to be a different person, and you need to hire different people. And at 5 million, you typically have to bring in more layers of management that affect the bottom line, not in a positive way. So typically it's between 700,000 and $1 million in SDE. Normally what we're seeing, depending on the market, is going to be 5 to 6 times in that area, and then bump up to that $10 million in sales. Residential, service, repair, replacement, around 8 to 9 times is what we see. In some markets, we'll see edging close to 10. 2 years ago, we were selling them 10 and 11 times, but right now we're seeing 8 to 9.5 times. Let's same thing, and it's commercial. Commercial is a little harder, because what I see in commercial is typically a company doing $10 million in sales. Either one of 2 things. One, needs to cover a real big, wide area, so they've got a huge travel expense. So they're often not as profitable, or there's a big construction component. If they're in a small area, they often do a lot of construction, and that has an impact on valuations. And we're typically seeing around a 5 to 6x multiple there. So 8 on residential at 10 million, 5 to 6 on commercial. That's all service and repair. So hopefully that gave people some guidelines. I know it's a wide range, but that's what we're seeing in the marketplace.
Yeah, I like that a lot. And I just going back to one of your last master classes, and that was, based off of for sellers, and you kind of asking people to, if they want to, get the highest multiple, avoid new construction. And then, the difference between residential and commercial. So can you just kind of talk to that for a second?
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
maybe
So
from a buyer's perspective?
yeah, so typically, now probably make some people on the call mad. Typically, construction's a race to the bottom, right? Most contractors are not loyal. They cut their own mother's throat to save 50 cents a square foot, and then they don't like paying. So you end up financing somebody else's installation for them, and it's not a great business model. That doesn't mean you can't do it and make money. Some people do, but from a buyer's perspective, most sellers that are big in construction say, "Oh, my contractors are loyal." Well, they're loyal to you, and the minute you walk out the door, the loyalty leaves. And so that's the challenge. And you're only as good as that economy being good. So the minute the economy slows down, that work stops and they don't pay you. And they file bankruptcy, change the name of their company, and start building houses under a different name. So buyers are scared to death of new construction, rightfully so.
I'm just looking through here and also kind of using my memory on the chat. What's your take on keeping the seller involved with the business, or when is it time to maybe try to phase them out?
I prefer short term.
Okay.
And I tell a buyer and seller both that, because here's the reality: you may not get along, right? And so if you convince the seller to stay on for a year, here's the thing: the business is where it's at because of the seller. So if it's stuck at 1 million or 2 million or 3 million, it's because of that seller. And the minute you come in and start changing things to grow, that seller's probably not going to be a cheerleader for you, right? Jimmy's gonna come to them and say, "Hey, I thought you didn't believe in maintenance agreements. Now everybody gets a maintenance agreement. Well, these jerks, they're doing everything wrong." The flip side of that is now you have to come in and fire the seller, the founder of the company. You've got to come in and say, "Get out of here. We don't want you because we want to grow." And so it's horrible from a PR
Not
standpoint.
good optics.
Absolutely. So my preference is say, how about stick around for 3 months and we'll revisit it after 3 months. In 3 months, if you still need them and they're still good, say, "Hey, we'd love to have you stick around for another three." If 3 months they're the cancer and they need to be gone, you pat them on the back, you have cake on Friday and say, "Happy retirement. And thank you very much for fulfilling your end of the bargain, and you can go." Then you're not firing them.
Right.
They did what they were supposed to do, and you're saying thank you and tell them to go have fun in retirement. So from a marketing standpoint to your team, it looks way better. So short term. Now, you're buying a company that does a lot of new construction. There's big relationships with contractors and there's projects going on and you need them. Then you may be stuck with them for a while.
Right. And to that point, how much interaction or, not is involved during the buying process between the buyer and the seller? And is that something that can
I
be
try to have
improved
tons.
upon working with the broker?
Yeah, so most brokers, unfortunately, try to keep the buyer and seller apart, right? They don't want them fighting. They don't want anything happening. I'm the exact opposite. Once a buyer has expressed interest and has looked at a summary, the next thing is to get them on a Zoom meeting. Let's talk. Let's see if we all get along. Next phase, let's have an in-person meeting. I want them together as much as we can be together, because at the end of the day, if they're a jerk and you're not going to like them, let's find it out now. Let's not find it out just before closing. Let's decide it's not a good deal and we're not going to move forward because we don't like each other, then at the end. And so the faster we can make that happen, the faster we can say it's not a deal. I'm all about saying it's not for me, right? That deal, if you're a buyer, get in. Nope, not for me. Move on. I respect that a ton, instead of milking it along for 3 months and saying, "Now I decide I don't like him." Let's all get together. And if the seller's a jerk, which happens, let's decide it now. And are you able to get rid of him fast enough that you feel comfortable? Or it's not for you and let's move on. If I'm selling 25 or 30 heating and air companies a year, SF&P is probably doing a similar number. Brandon Jacob is probably doing 10 or 15 a year. I mean, there's 60 or 70 companies just with 3 brokers that you can look at, not counting what else is out there. So there's a ton of deals to be had. You don't have to. I tell a seller you don't have to sell to a jerk, and I tell a buyer you don't have to buy from a jerk. Move on and find one that's a better fit.
Absolutely. And so we're about 5 minutes over, but there's still 50 people on. So are you available to still answer a couple questions?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to answer whatever I can. I appreciate everybody
Awesome.
sticking around.
Yeah, and for everyone, I mean, that might have submitted a question 10, 15 minutes ago, if you could just resubmit so I don't have to keep scrolling through the chat. Patrick, let's see. For those without a license in Florida looking to purchase with the SBA loan, you gave several options to obtain the license. In your opinion, what would have to be offered to the seller that would sweeten the deal enough for them to consider retaining equity to satisfy the RMO, RME requirements?
I I don't know if I'm a seller, there'd be nothing you could offer me because once again, they're 100% liable for that
Right.
loan. Um, if it, before, when there wasn't the loan liability, all my sellers would stay on and qualify a license. That's not a big deal. Here's the reality. In the state of Florida, because I'm in Florida, so I know the rules here. In the state of Florida, you can qualify 3 businesses with one license. You should have no problem finding somebody who would qualify you and give them a little bit of ownership to be your license qualifier, 3%, 5%, whatever it is, make it non-voting. I mean, you could structure it so they're not going to take your company away and do that ahead of time. So then when you apply to the SBA, you say, hey, buying a business, my 5% partner's license holder, and we're moving on. And it's done. So it's easy enough to find a license qualifier in most states. State of Florida, somebody to qualify your license, 1,000 to 1,500 bucks a month. You can give them some ownership. They become part of the business. They don't need to be there and messing up your business until you get your license. In Florida, there's also a kind of caveat in the rule. It's typically 4 years of experience, 3 years if you have a college degree, but there's also a management section where you can get a license in a year. So you only need them to be there for a year.
Okay, cool. I'm just going to remind everybody with a link to join the preferred buyer network. You can go there now or you can go there after the show, but I just dropped that link in the chat. And I'm noticing some people are submitting questions just to the host and the panelists. Others are, posting to everyone. So I'll just go ahead and keep, the names out of it. But my company acquires HVAC, plumbing, electrical companies. We are a platform. So I'm assuming that's a buying group. Regarding sourcing new deals, do you think cold calling is beneficial, or is forming relationships with brokers more beneficial, or a combination of both?
So, and I think everything, right? I think the more you can do, the better. Cold calling works. It's a numbers game, right? At the end of the day, I think doing it all. I think like me, we do everything we can to be all places in front of all people to help develop those relationships. And the more you do that, I think the better off you're going to do. I've seen some buyers that operate just on cold calling. I've seen others that just work with brokers. I've seen others that do everything directly through the supply houses or TMs. To me, the most deal flow is to do them all. So that would
Right.
be my advice. And I cheated and looked at the chat for 1 second. I saw James said, go Gators. Obviously, got my Gators behind me. Unfortunately, the Gators stink this year and it's been a long season. And I've been in the swamp watching too many losing games, but I'm hoping after a 2-week break here, we'll be back ready to go. So thank you, James, and go Gators.
Got babe. Novice buyer here. So when you mention multiples, are you referring to multiples of their net profits?
Great question. So we use what's called SDE, seller discretionary earnings. We take net profit off the bottom of the tax return and we add back interest, depreciation, amortization, and the owner's comp. And so it's EBITDA, which is often talked about, plus owner's compensation. So it's net profit plus those items, because those items, the depreciation is just accounting expense. The interest we add back because you're not taking over their loans. These are cash-free, debt-free transactions. And the owner's comp, because that's what you'd be making as the owner.
Nice. So that just leads me into the next question. SDE is a big variable, especially when the owner wears all the hats in the organization. Is there a clear definition of that?
Yeah, and so it's that EBITDA plus owner's comp. So here's the reality and why I use SDE. One, smaller deals are typically traded on SDE. Typically, smaller companies are run by the owner. So that's real. Them being compensated is real because they're the one running it. I have buyers come to me and say, well, I've got to replace that owner. I'm not going to run it myself. So I need to make an adjustment. And my thing is make an adjustment. We show SDE so that you can say, as the owner of the business and the operator, Here's what he or she is making. If you need to move locations, or you need to hire people, or you need to buy new vans, or whatever you need to do, my advice is, and I had this conversation this morning, similar scenario, guy operates it out of his house, and the buyer said, well, I've got to move to a location, I've got to take rent. So I said, great, when you make an offer that's lower than the asking price, say, hey, I'm reducing the asking price because I've got to spend $25,000 a year on rent that you're not spending, so I'm taking that out of the calculation. And if you say it that way, my experience with sellers have been, they understand it. I mean, they understand that they've got a good deal going, and it's resulting in them making more money. Now, if you say, I'm not going to run the business, I'm going to hire 4 people, I'm going to do this, they're probably not going to be as understanding. But if you come with a logical, hey, here's why I'm not including this, and this is how I got to my price. Too often people come in $1 million less and just say, hey, I'm $1 million less, instead of giving a rationale of here's how I got to this price and why.
Right. Kenny Barron asks, who are the lenders we should be talking to?
Kenny should know that. He's been at enough events that I've been at. Live Oak is my preferred partner. Live Oak Bank, Jordan Cordero and Dylan Caraway. They've lent more in heating and air and plumbing than anybody in the country. And they know it, right? The downside, hopefully they don't watch this, the downside to Live Oak is they're probably more conservative than most banks. So there's not really much of a gray area with them. The upside with it is they know the space so well, so they'll give you a yes or no instantly. My experience in every deal I've ever sent to them that they said yes, we've closed. First Internet Bank is another bank that does well. A little more gray area for those looking at gray area. Alan Peterson is there, but my number one go-to is going to be Live Oak.
Nice. Thank you for that recommendation. Jordan is awesome. I've interacted with him a few times through the EGIA environment. So yeah, can back that too. SR asks, how do you deal with customer concentration, i.e. 50% of revenue is tied to 3 times customers?
Ooh, super risky deal. And I said I don't believe in earnouts and I don't believe in seller notes. That's the only way I would do a deal like that. If I'm a buyer, having that much concentration, one, valuation should be impacted by it. The valuation should be less because of the customer concentration. But if I'm buying it, that's way too much concentration that I would structure it I wouldn't structure it based on revenue. It would have to be they're going to stick around in some capacity for a period of time. Because you're paying whatever multiple for the income they generate. If you're buying it for a 3x or a 5x multiple or whatever it is, you're paying 5 years worth of income off that customer. If they leave in month 1, you've just lost 5 years of income.
Right. That's a good perspective as well. So Josh is asking, I'm not 100% sure I understand the question, but you can clarify, Josh. He said, was the KPI question addressed in response to buying a $1 million or less company selling at a 3 to 5 million? If we were buying a smaller company, 1 million or less.
So I saw when I was looking earlier, there was a question about what KPIs do we look for? Typically we don't. I'm not going to analyze the intricate workings of the business. We're going to look at gross, net, maintenance agreements, commercial, residential, employee tenure, location, owner's responsibilities. So we're going to look at a lot of makeups of the business, but how many calls they run per day, or what their turnover rate is. That's not stuff that I'm going to measure. That's what a buyer should measure, in my opinion. So having an understanding of what KPIs are for you, because here's the reality: company doing $1.5 million or $1 million in sales doesn't track any KPIs typically. They just get up and go to work. And so there's no KPIs being tracked. Bigger companies will, but what they track versus what you track may be 2 different things. So there's no real broad way to do that.
Absolutely. Well, that we've come to the end of our questions. Thank you so much for everybody that's attended today, that's stayed on for an extra 15 minutes, that have really contributed to the chat and contributed to the conversation. Patrick, as always, this was an incredible glimpse into the world of HVAC mergers and acquisitions and unmatched expertise. And I appreciate your time. I always appreciate hanging out with you, my friend. What's the closing thought from you? What should everybody be focused on here?
Thank you. If you're a buyer, I'd join my list. I'm biased. There's my self plug for the day. And don't hesitate to reach out, right? I'm everywhere. Social media, you can find me, my phone number, LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook. If I can answer a question, don't hesitate to look out. And if they go to that buyer's page, I'll look at a deal you're looking at. So if you're looking at a deal and want somebody to look over your shoulder and say, hey, what do you think? I'm more than happy to do that. So don't hesitate to send it over. If I can help out in any way, I'd love an opportunity. Thank you for giving me the time, giving me the platform to talk, and I wish everybody the best in their purchase.
Absolutely. Thanks again, all. I'm going to leave you guys with one more opportunity to sign up for that preferred buyer network. So for now, bye-bye, and hope to talk to you again real soon, Patrick.
Thank you. Have a wonderful day, everyone.